The dense forest stretched out in all directions, an ancient, uncharted world where the trees seemed to touch the sky. Sunlight barely filtered through the thick canopy, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. Here, in this isolated wildlife sanctuary, nature followed its own rules. The air was thick with the scent of earth and leaves, a constant hum of life, insects, and distant bird calls filling the air. But today something was different. The hum felt deeper, more urgent, like a storm gathering just out of sight. A wild house cat, lean and sinewy, prowled through the underbrush. Her fur, sleek and dark, blended with the shadows as she moved in utter silence. She was the queen of this domain, cunning, skilled, and above all, a master of stealth. Her eyes, yellow and sharp, flicked from side to side, constantly scanning for movement. She was hunting, but not for food. Something felt off. The forest had a strange energy today, a quiet tension that hadn't been here before. She padded through the thick ferns, her sharp claws making no sound against the soft earth. The scent of the air was familiar, but the undercurrent of something unknown lingered. As she moved deeper into the forest, the usual smells of small mammals, birds, and the damp musk of moss seemed faint, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, the familiar scent of prey was replaced by something new, a strong, musky odor, foreign to this landscape. The cat froze, her ears perked, her muscles tensing as she scanned the surroundings. She hadn't imagined it. There was something, or rather, someone here that didn't belong. The underbrush rustled. She crept closer, her body low to the ground, the silence of her movement both eerie and deliberate. She was a predator, and predators always hunted alone. Then, out of the thicket, a shape appeared. A camel, a massive creature with its thick coat of fur and long legs stretching far above the smaller vegetation. The cat's eyes narrowed. How had it gotten here? Camels were creatures of dry deserts, not the dense, humid woodlands of this remote sanctuary. It was an anomaly, something that shouldn't be here. The camel was moving slowly, as though it had no care for the unfamiliar surroundings, its heavy hooves making dull thuds against the ground. It didn't seem frightened, nor did it seem aware of the cat's presence. It wandered deeper into the forest, its long neck swaying with each slow step, oblivious to the natural tension that the cat could sense. The wild house cat's muscles rippled with conflicting instincts, curiosity, caution, and hunger. She could feel the stirring of an ancient urge, a need to chase, to hunt. But this was no ordinary prey. There was something strange about this camel's presence. It didn't belong here, and yet it seemed to move with a quiet confidence that felt odd. The forest was eerily quiet, the usual chatter of birds and insects stilled, as if the entire land was holding its breath. The air was thick with tension, charged with a sense of something imminent. The cat slinked closer, her body in perfect alignment with the earth. She was nearly upon the camel when a sudden movement caught her attention. A rustle from above. She snapped her head toward the noise, her body frozen in place. From the shadows of the trees, a bird of prey, large and menacing, descended with a sharp screech. Its wings sliced through the air, its talons extended toward the camel. The cat's heart raced as she crouched low, her eyes darting between the camel and the bird. The camel, unaware of the bird's approach, continued walking, its gait slow and unhurried. The bird was fast, its descent almost too quick to follow. The cat's muscles tensed, ready to spring into action. But as the bird neared its target, the camel's massive head swung around. With startling speed for such a large creature, the camel reared back on its hind legs and kicked out. The bird screeched, swerving sharply to avoid the powerful blow, its wings beating furiously to regain balance. The camel, unshaken, stood tall, its eyes burning with an ancient resolve, as if it had been here long before any predator had set foot in the woods. The cat, still crouched low, watched in awe. There was something almost otherworldly about the camel. This was no ordinary creature. It was as if the forest itself had summoned it. Its movements were slow yet deliberate, as though it was attuned to something far beyond the reach of any predator. The air was thick with a stillness that hung like a thick fog. The camel and the cat were locked in a strange, unspoken standoff. The wild house cat's instincts screamed for her to move, to take action, but something in the air held her back. Something had changed. The camel, having successfully warded off the bird, turned slowly, its gaze meeting the cat's from across the clearing. For a moment, neither creature moved. The cat's heart hammered in her chest as her eyes locked with the camel's, the two animals staring each other down in an eerie silence. She was poised, her muscles coiled like a spring, ready to pounce. Yet, in that moment, something unexpected happened. The ground trembled beneath her paws, just a slight vibration at first, but it grew steadily stronger. The trees groaned, their ancient trunks swaying ominously. A low rumble reverberated through the air, deep and resonant. The wild house cat's eyes widened. This was no natural tremor. It was as if the very earth was alive and stirring. The camel lowered its head, its nostrils flaring as it inhaled deeply. It seemed to be listening, feeling the pulse of the land beneath its feet. The cat's fur stood on end. The forest, the entire sanctuary, had shifted in response to the presence of the camel. Suddenly, the earth beneath the cat gave way with a deafening crack. The ground shifted and broke, a jagged rift opening up before her. The cat leapt backwards, narrowly avoiding the chasm that had appeared in the earth. She landed gracefully, her instincts kicking in as she scrambled to gain her bearings. But when she looked up, the camel was gone. The rift in the earth seemed to have swallowed it whole. The forest was still once more, but the tension that had filled the air now hung like a heavy cloud. The cat stood frozen, her chest heaving, her fur bristling. The strange presence of the camel was gone, but its mark had been left on the land. The world around her seemed to have shifted, as if the land itself had been altered by the camel's presence. The wild house cat turned, her instincts telling her to leave, to escape this unnatural place. She slinked away through the forest, but as she passed the clearing, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching her. And though the forest seemed quiet once more, the cat knew that this place, this strange sanctuary, had changed forever. The cat's paws barely made a sound as she moved through the undergrowth, her every sense on high alert. The forest, once full of familiar sounds and smells, now felt foreign and unsettling. The subtle rustling of leaves, the hum of insects, the calls of distant birds, all of it seemed distant, muffled, as if the forest itself was in a state of unease. The trembling she had felt in the earth lingered in her muscles, the strange vibration still echoing through her as she crept through the trees. She paused, her ears swiveling to catch every sound. Her sharp yellow eyes scanned the path ahead, but the dense foliage offered no clue as to what lay beyond. Everything felt off, as though the natural order had been disrupted. The camel's sudden disappearance, the rumbling earth, it had all been too surreal, too unnatural, and now, in the aftermath, the forest felt almost empty, like a place caught between worlds. The cat padded cautiously, her movements slow and deliberate. Her instincts told her to trust nothing, to question every leaf that stirred, every branch that creaked. But her curiosity, the thing that had so often driven her to explore the edges of the unknown, was gnawing at her. The presence of the camel, its strange and otherworldly nature, had left a lingering question in her mind. What was that creature, and where had it gone? As she continued to weave through the undergrowth, something caught her eye, a subtle shift in the shadows ahead. She froze, her muscles tensing, every fiber of her being focused on the movement. Something was there. The shadows parted, and another shape emerged from the thick ferns. A large creature, its silhouette large and bulky against the dappled light of the forest. But this was no camel. This was a different form altogether. At first, the cat could not place it. The creature was too unfamiliar, too unusual. It moved in slow, deliberate strides, its body low to the ground, almost undetectable against the thick underbrush. The cat's eyes narrowed. It was another predator. She could sense that much. But it wasn't like the other predators she had encountered. There was something about it that seemed to pulse with an ancient power, something deeply connected to the land itself. Her heart skipped a beat as the creature stepped into a patch of sunlight. The cat's breath caught in her throat. Before her stood a massive, shaggy creature, part bison, part something else. Its fur was thick and dark, hanging in heavy tufts around its massive shoulders. Its hooves were wide and powerful, leaving deep impressions in the soft earth as it moved. Its eyes, though large and expressive, seemed vacant, distant, like those of a creature who had lived long before the world had changed. The creature didn't notice her, its head low as it fed on the underbrush, its great muscles shifting with each slow motion. The cat crouched low, trying to make herself as small as possible in the dense foliage. She could feel the heat of the creature's body radiating through the air, even at a distance. It was a formidable presence, one that made her question her place in this forest, her role as the silent predator. For a long while, the cat remained motionless, watching the creature. Its presence was unnerving, but it was not aggressive. It moved with a sort of mournful grace, its great head occasionally lifting to scan the surroundings. The cat could feel the weight of the forest around her, the silence pressing in, the trees whispering ancient secrets she could not understand. The cat's instincts told her to move on, to slip back into the shadows, but something kept her there. The creature was not a threat, at least not in the way other predators were. There was something deeper, more profound about its presence, something tied to the very fabric of the forest itself. As she watched, something else caught her attention, a small, subtle movement among the trees. A figure, cloaked in shadow, stepped cautiously from the underbrush. It was another animal, an old, weathered deer, its eyes wide with apprehension. The cat's pulse quickened. She had seen this deer before, in the northern part of the sanctuary. It was the leader of a small herd, always cautious, always aware of the dangers in the forest. The deer moved with a careful grace, its head held high as it surveyed the area. It had seen the massive creature, but it did not retreat. Instead, it moved forward, its steps deliberate, as though it had a purpose. The cat watched in silence, unsure of what to make of the encounter. She had never seen these two creatures together before. The deer, usually so solitary and wary, seemed almost drawn to the massive, shaggy being, its movements synchronized in a strange, unspoken dance. The cat blinked, a chill running down her spine. The air felt heavy again, the same pressure that had hung over the forest earlier. The camel's disappearance had left a gap, and now these strange creatures seemed to fill it, their presence binding the fabric of the forest together in a way she couldn't fully comprehend. And then, as if the forest itself had been holding its breath, the ground trembled once more. The cat felt it again, a deep, resonant pulse beneath her paws. The trees around her seemed to shudder, their trunks creaking in protest. A distant rumble like thunder echoed through the air. But this time, the cat felt something new, a sense of foreboding, a feeling that the forest was awakening, that the land itself was stirring in response to something unseen. The deer and the massive creature turned toward one another, their gazes locked for a brief moment before the deer slowly backed away. The massive being, in turn, began to move, its large hooves thudding against the earth, its body swaying with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The cat could feel the tension mounting, a strange pull between the creatures, as though they were on the cusp of something ancient, something long buried beneath the earth's surface. In that moment, the wild house cat understood that something had shifted in the forest, something far beyond the boundaries of her understanding. She had always been a lone hunter, a creature who thrived on independence, on being apart from the world. But now, as she watched the creatures, both familiar and foreign, interact, she realized that the balance of the forest was no longer hers to control. The vibrations grew stronger, the air pulsing with energy as the ground trembled once more. The wild cat stood frozen, her fur bristling as the tension in the forest reached a peak. And then, in the space between heartbeats, everything went still. The cat turned and fled into the trees, her body moving like a shadow as she vanished into the depths of the forest. But even as she disappeared into the darkness, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had begun. A cycle that would change the forest forever. The cat had been part of this wild world for as long as she could remember, but now she was only a witness to something far greater than herself, something that the forest had been waiting for, something that would alter its very course. The wild cat darted through the underbrush, her heart pounding in rhythm with the tremors beneath the ground. The forest, which had once felt like her domain, now seemed vast, unfathomable, and ominous. The feeling of displacement gnawed at her, as if the very air had changed, twisting around her like a shifting fog. Her instincts urged her to flee farther, to escape the strange convergence that had unfolded before her. Yet, even as she raced through the trees, something tethered her to the forest, the pulse of the land itself. Her paws barely made a sound against the soft, damp earth as she moved swiftly through the towering trees, but the weight of the situation hung heavily on her shoulders. The vibrations in the ground were growing more erratic, almost frantic now. She could hear the subtle rustling of leaves, the distant creaking of branches, and yet there was an overwhelming silence hanging in the air, as if the entire world was holding its breath. The trembling underfoot became more intense, each tremor deeper and more unsettling, like the forest was shifting beneath her very paws. Her sharp eyes scanned the forest floor, seeking refuge in the shadows. She instinctively knew that her safety was no longer guaranteed, that the creature with the ancient presence had altered something profound within the land. This was no longer just a hunt for food. It had become something else. Something darker, something ancient. But even with her sharp senses, the wildcat was powerless to stop the unfolding events. The world was changing, and the vibrations, the pulsing energy in the soil, were reaching a crescendo. And then it happened. The earth split open. A deep, violent rift tore through the ground in front of her, the jagged edges of the new chasm glowing faintly, as if the land itself had been awakened. The cat stopped dead in her tracks, her body frozen in place, her yellow eyes wide in disbelief. The tremors were now so violent that the trees around her began to sway precariously, the forest seemingly rebelling against its own existence. From the depths of the rifts, a figure began to emerge, not the massive creature she had seen earlier, nor the solitary deer. This was something else entirely. At first, it seemed like a shadow, but as it slowly ascended from the depths, the wildcat's keen eyes made out the shape of a being that defied description. It was as though the rift itself had opened a portal into another world. The creature that emerged from it was an amalgamation of all the ancient forces of the forest. Its body massive, with twisted horns that rose like gnarled branches reaching towards the sky. The fur was dark, almost black, but dotted with patches of luminous patterns that flickered and shifted like the forest's very essence. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, piercing through the shadows with an intensity that made the cat's fur stand on end. The presence of the creature was overwhelming, and as it stood there, emerging from the rift, the forest seemed to tremble in acknowledgement. The wild cat felt a wave of pure dread wash over her. This was not an animal. This was something older than time, something that had been buried, hidden beneath the earth for centuries, perhaps millennia.